For more than 2 decades, Jay-Z and 50 Cent have occupied positions in hip-hop that very few artists ever reach. Both men emerged from difficult environments, built careers that reshaped the industry, and eventually moved beyond music into lasting economic and cultural influence. Despite these similarities, they have consistently represented two different approaches to power, legitimacy, and leadership within the culture. Jay-Z's rise followed a measured and deliberate path. Raised in Brooklyn's Marcy projects, he entered the music industry with a focus on ownership and long-term control. Rather than relying solely on traditional record label structures, he co-founded Rockefeller Records, ensuring that his role extended beyond performance into decision-making. This early emphasis on equity allowed him to expand his influence gradually, moving from music into fashion, sports management, media, and corporate partnerships. By the time speculation emerged around subsequent high-profile decisions, including later Super Bowl lineups, the narrative had already been established. Every absence, every selection, and every silence was interpreted through the lens of institutional power. The rivalry had moved from background commentary to a framework through which broader concerns about access and influence were examined. This evolution set the stage for the final phase of the conflict, where commentary would shift toward documentation and long-term implications for leadership within hip-hop. As Jay-Z's profile grew, his public posture shifted. He became increasingly selective about when and how he spoke. Public disputes were avoided and criticism often went unanswered. Over time, silence became part of his authority. By the late 2000s, he was no longer perceived primarily as a rapper competing for relevance, but as a cultural executive whose decisions could shape access, visibility, and legitimacy across entertainment. 50 Cent's trajectory developed in sharp contrast. Raised in South Jamaica, Queens, his entry into hip-hop was immediate and confrontational. After surviving a near-fatal shooting, he emerged with an image built on resilience, aggression, and dominance. His early success was driven not only by music, but by his willingness to engage openly in conflict. Rivalries, diss records, and public disputes became central to how he built momentum. Where Jay-Z reduced exposure through restraint, 50 Cent increased it through confrontation. His rise coincided with a period when visibility was fueled by rivalry, and he understood how to convert conflict into commercial leverage. As the leader of G-Unit, he used competition as a tool rather than a liability. This approach brought controversy, but it also produced sustained attention and financial success. For many years, these opposing styles existed without direct escalation. Jay-Z and 50 Cent move within the same industry, often referenced in relation to one another, but rarely engaged head-on. Any tension remained indirect, surfacing through commentary or interviews without becoming a central narrative. This equilibrium held while both men remained primarily focused on music. As time passed, however, both figures transitioned into positions of broader institutional authority. Jay-Z expanded Roc Nation from a record label into a full-scale entertainment and management company representing artists, athletes, and major events. 50 Cent shifted his focus into television and film production, gaining control over content development, budgets, and distribution. By the time both reached comparable financial standing, their influence had moved beyond performance into governance. This shift changed the nature of their relevance. When influence operates at the level of platforms rather than charts, disagreements carry structural implications. Decisions no longer affect only individual careers, but entire systems of access and recognition. Visibility becomes something that can be managed rather than competed for openly. For much of this period, the public perceived stability. Jay-Z maintained a low-profile approach, rarely commenting on industry disputes. 50 Cent continued speaking openly, but without sustained focus on Jay-Z. Both appeared to occupy separate lanes, each successful by his own standards, each influential in different ways. That perception would later begin to change, not through a single announcement or public confrontation, but through a gradual shift in how power within hip-hop was discussed. What had once been understood as stylistic difference began to take on the weight of philosophical disagreement. The question was no longer about who was more successful, but about how success was maintained and who ultimately controlled access to the culture's most visible platforms. This evolving tension set the stage for a broader conflict, one that would move beyond music and into the structure of modern hip-hop itself. As both men moved further into positions of institutional influence, the distance between their approaches became more visible. Jay-Z's authority increasingly operated through formal partnerships and governance structures. His involvement in sports management, licensing, and large-scale entertainment positioned him as a decision-maker whose influence extended well beyond music. Access to major platforms, once driven primarily by popularity or momentum, now intersected with corporate relationships and long-term strategy. One of the most significant expansions of Jay-Z's influence came through Roc Nation's partnership with the National Football League. The agreement placed his company in an advisory role over the league's live music strategy, including the Super Bowl halftime show. While the partnership was publicly framed as an effort to improve cultural representation, it also placed Jay-Z in proximity to one of the most visible stages in global entertainment. Decisions made within that framework carried symbolic weight, signaling not only artistic recognition but historical legitimacy. At the time, this arrangement drew limited public scrutiny. Jay-Z's role was described as advisory rather than directive, and the NFL retained formal authority over final decisions. Still, the perception that Roc Nation functioned as a gate between artists and one of the largest platforms in the world introduced a new dimension to Jay-Z's power. It was no longer confined to music markets or business ventures. It now intersected with institutional validation. 50 Cent's expansion followed a different pattern. His success in television, particularly as the creator and executive producer of a major franchise, placed him in control of narratives rather than access points. He did not govern stages or awards, but he controlled content pipelines. His authority was visible and direct, expressed through credits, contracts, and public statements. While Jay-Z's power became quieter, 50 Cent's remained openly asserted. This contrast would later shape how conflict emerged between them. The tension re-entered public discussion following the 2022 Super Bowl halftime show. The event was widely celebrated as a defining moment for hip-hop, featuring Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Kendrick Lamar, and Mary J. Blige. The performance was framed as overdue recognition for artists who had shaped modern music. 50 Cent appeared during the show as a surprise guest, performing "Into Club," and the moment was received positively by audiences. In the months that followed, however, 50 Cent began offering a different account of how his appearance came together. In interviews, he stated that his participation had not been guaranteed. According to 50 Cent, Jay-Z discouraged his inclusion, using his role within the NFL partnership to influence who appeared on the stage. The claim was presented not as a personal insult, but as an example of selective access exercised through institutional authority. 50 Cent's framing was deliberate. He did not argue that he lacked merit or popularity. Instead, he suggested that decisions were being shaped by internal hierarchies rather than open competition. In his account, the issue was not artistic value, but control over representation. The Super Bowl in this context became a symbol of how power functions when culture intersects with corporate governance. The allegation gained attention when 50 Cent stated that Eminem intervened. According to his account, Eminem refused to perform unless 50 Cent was included. This version of events later appeared in public commentary from other figures, including NORE, who stated that Jay-Z acknowledged Eminem's insistence. While no official documentation was released, the consistency of these accounts shifted the discussion from rumor to debate. Jay-Z did not respond publicly. As in previous moments of criticism, he maintained silence. This absence of comment allowed multiple interpretations. Supporters viewed it as discipline and confidence, consistent with his long-standing approach to public conflict. Critics viewed it as insulation enabled by institutional power. Regardless of interpretation, the lack of response left the narrative largely shaped by those speaking. For many observers, this episode reframed the long-standing tension between Jay-Z and 50 Cent. It was no longer understood as background rivalry or personal disagreement. It became an example used to question how decisions are made at the highest levels of cultural exposure. The Super Bowl is not merely a performance, it functions as a marker of legacy. Inclusion signals recognition that extends beyond commercial success. Following the Super Bowl discussion, 50 Cent expanded his criticism. He began questioning Jay-Z's recent Grammy wins, suggesting that they reflected proximity to Beyoncé rather than contemporary artistic dominance. The implication was that awards recognition had become intertwined with brand alliances and institutional relationships. While the comments were controversial, they aligned with 50 Cent's broader argument about how legitimacy is distributed within the industry. This line of criticism drew particular attention because it challenged the neutrality of established institutions. Awards historically framed as measures of artistic excellence were now presented as extensions of corporate ecosystems. By linking Jay-Z's recognition to his marriage and broader brand positioning, 50 Cent questioned whether influence had replaced competition as the primary determinant of success. He further criticized Jay-Z's evolving public image, particularly his embrace of elite cultural aesthetics. References to fine art, high fashion, and institutional spaces were framed as evidence of assimilation. To 50 Cent, this transformation symbolized a departure from hip-hop's original posture of resistance. The criticism was not aimed at wealth itself, but at the alignment with systems that once excluded artists from similar backgrounds. As the debate continued to circulate, the conflict between Jay-Z and 50 Cent moved beyond isolated incidents and into a broader discussion about leadership, legitimacy, and the future structure of hip-hop. What had once been understood as rivalry was now interpreted as a sustained disagreement over how influence should be exercised once artists reached positions of institutional authority. By this stage, both men occupied comparable levels of economic and cultural power. Each had built companies that extended beyond music, each controlled intellectual property, production pipelines, and long-term revenue streams. Neither depended on chart performance for relevance. This parity made the conflict more significant because it was no longer framed as a struggle between an insider and an outsider. It was a clash between two insiders with fundamentally different views on governance. Jay-Z's influence operated through discretion, alignment, and embedded authority. His partnerships placed him within existing systems of power, allowing him to shape outcomes without public confrontation. Decisions made within those systems were rarely explained publicly, and accountability was diffused across institutions rather than individuals. This model emphasized stability, predictability, and long-term positioning. 50 Cent's influence followed a different logic. He relied on visibility, direct engagement, and public pressure. When he perceived imbalance, he addressed it openly. His authority derived not from institutional appointment, but from audience reach and cultural resonance. This model emphasized exposure, disruption, and competition. It treated silence not as strength, but as avoidance. These models do not easily coexist. Institutional power relies on managed access and controlled messaging. Disruptive power relies on transparency and confrontation. As both men continued to operate at the highest levels of the industry, their differing approaches increasingly collided. The tension intensified when 50 Cent confirmed that he was developing a documentary project focused on power structures within entertainment. While details remained limited, he indicated that the project would examine how decisions are made behind closed doors and how access is granted or withheld. Jay-Z's role within these systems was referenced as part of that examination. The announcement marked a shift in strategy. Rather than continuing commentary through interviews or social media, 50 Cent signaled an intention to formalize his critique. Documentation rather than accusation became the stated objective. Whether the project would introduce new information or reframe existing claims remained unclear. What was clear was that 50 Cent viewed the issue as unresolved and systemic. Jay-Z did not respond to the announcement. As before, his silence remained consistent. He continued expanding Roc Nation's presence across sports, entertainment, and cultural governance. No statements were issued addressing the documentary, the Super Bowl allegations, or the broader claims of gatekeeping. The absence of engagement reinforced the existing divide in approach. At this point, the conflict no longer required escalation to persist. It was sustained by structure rather than reaction. Every new platform, partnership, or recognition was interpreted through the lens of institutional influence. Every critique or public statement was framed as a challenge to centralized authority. The rivalry had become a reference point for larger conversations within the industry. Importantly, there was still no legal dispute between the two men. No formal complaints were filed. No contractual challenges emerged. The conflict existed in discourse rather than courtrooms. This distinction mattered because it underscored the nature of the disagreement. It was not about violation of law, but about control of culture. Observers noted that both approaches had produced success. Jay-Z's model demonstrated how integration into existing systems could yield longevity and stability. 50 Cent's model demonstrated how confrontation and transparency could maintain relevance and leverage. The question was not which model worked, but which model should define leadership going forward. This question extended beyond Jay-Z and 50 Cent. It applied to how emerging artists viewed power. It influenced how institutions justified decisions. It shaped how audiences interpreted silence and speech. In this way, the conflict functioned as a case study rather than a personal feud. The debate also exposed a shift in hip-hop's relationship with institutions. As the genre matured, its leaders increasingly occupied roles within corporations, leagues, and governance structures. With that shift came new responsibilities and new criticisms. The line between representation and control became less clear. Jay-Z and 50 Cent embodied opposite responses to that shift. Jay-Z's approach suggested that influence is most effective when exercised quietly and strategically. It prioritized access over visibility and alignment over confrontation. 50 Cent's approach suggested that influence must remain visible to remain accountable. It prioritized exposure over discretion and challenge over alignment. Neither position resolved the tension. Instead, they defined it. This question extended beyond Jay-Z and 50 Cent. It applied to how emerging artists viewed power. It influenced how institutions justified decisions. It shaped how audiences interpreted silence and speech. In this way, the conflict functioned as a case study rather than a personal feud. The debate also exposed a shift in hip-hop's relationship with institutions. As the genre matured, its leaders increasingly occupied roles within corporations, leagues, and governance structures. With that shift came new responsibilities and new criticisms. The line between representation and control became less clear. Jay-Z and 50 Cent embodied opposite responses to that shift. Jay-Z's approach suggested that influence is most effective when exercised quietly and strategically. It prioritized access over visibility and alignment over confrontation. 50 Cent's approach suggested that influence must remain visible to remain accountable. It prioritized exposure over discretion and challenge over alignment. Neither position resolved the tension. Instead, they defined it. As time passed, the absence of resolution became part of the story. Jay-Z's continued silence signaled confidence that institutional positioning would endure, regardless of public critique. 50 Cent's continued commentary signaled confidence that scrutiny could still disrupt closed systems. Both positions relied on different assumptions about how power functions. For audiences, the conflict offered insight into how cultural authority is maintained. It revealed that access to platforms is not solely determined by popularity or merit, but by relationships, governance, and strategy. It also revealed that those structures are rarely transparent, and that challenges to them often come from within. The rivalry no longer depended on new allegations to remain relevant. It was sustained by the ongoing contrast between two philosophies. Each public appearance, each partnership, and each critique reinforced the divide. The issue was no longer whether one man would respond to the other, but whether the industry would acknowledge the questions being raised. As of now, there is no indication that the conflict will resolve through reconciliation or confrontation. Jay-Z shows no sign of altering his approach. 50 Cent shows no sign of disengaging from critique. Both continue operating at scale, shaping culture through different mechanisms. What remains is a documented clash between two models of leadership. One emphasizes institutional alignment and controlled influence. The other emphasizes exposure and resistance to centralized power. Both have shaped hip-hop's evolution, and both continue to influence its direction. The outcome of this conflict may not be determined by who speaks louder or who remains silent. It may be determined by how future artists, executives, and audiences interpret power itself. Whether influence is best exercised through discretion or challenge remains an open question. For now, the rivalry stands not as a personal dispute, but as an ongoing examination of how authority is constructed, maintained, and contested within hip-hop. As long as both men remain active within the highest levels of the industry, that examination is unlikely to conclude quietly.